Hi, everyone. This is Virginia and Jason from Compliance Forward. We are here today with a special edition of the Promotional Intelligence podcast. And we're going to be talking about an enforcement letter that just got posted this week on June 2nd. And it was for a product called SUCRAID. Jason's going to break it down. We're going to talk about the violations, the rationale, we think, for why they were cited, and what makes this one particularly interesting. There are a couple nuggets in there, and so let's get to it. All right, go ahead, Jason.
Okay, thanks, Virginia. Let me get my screen share up. So what we're going to look at today, we have the Untitled letter. We're going to take a look at the promotional material that the FDA posted. And we're also going to take a look at the label, which is going to be really interesting because it's in the non-PLR format. So it's going to look a little bit different than what we're used to seeing. But let's take a look first in the cover letter here of the Untitled letter. So the letter starts out by talking about the promotional communications that are cited. There's two materials here, a pediatric email and an adult email. So there's two emails that are subject to this Untitled letter. Both of these emails are talking about a trial offer for getting a trial of the product, and they're directed towards HCPs. And we're going to take a look at the emails here in a minute. The letter also notes that both of these emails were submitted under cover of FDA Form 2253. And finally, the FDA has determined that the emails are false and misleading, which is why they are receiving the Untitled letter. The letter then goes on to outline a couple of the claims and presentations. So let's flip over to the promotional piece, because I think it'll make more sense if we look at this promotional piece to understand how the claims and presentations were assembled in this piece. So very simple email. There's not a whole lot going on in these emails. There's two emails here. We're just going to take a look at the first page because both emails in this package look the same. We see at the top, we have the logo lockup, and then we have a claim that says try SUCRAID. Below that, in the middle section, we have another presentation that says, do you have patients suffering with unresolved IBS-like symptoms, including gas, bloating, diarrhea, and nausea? And then it asks, could it be a CSID, which is the condition that SUCRAID is approved to treat? And then we have some information about how HCPs can get a SUCRAID 4-day trial. We also see a little star here for a footnote. Then it says to learn more about the only FDA-approved enzyme replacement therapy for the treatment of CSID. And then the email wraps up with a call to action. And we have the footnote here with the terms of conditions, And then finally, we wrap up with the indication and important safety information. And when we flip back to the letter, we see a few things. So the letter calls out a few violations. Now, the letter breaks the violations into two sections. The first section talks about efficacy information, and the second section, which we're going to get to in a few minutes, we're going to talk about efficacy first, but the second section of the letter talks about the risk presentation. So the first thing here in this first paragraph are the presentations of efficacy information, and what the agency is calling out are a few things. First, they say that the presentation of the IBS-like symptoms, it implies that the overlapping symptoms of congenital sucrase isomaltase deficiency, CSID, can be used to treat IBS. They also say that the email implies that SUCRAID can be used to treat all contributing factors of CSID, which is not the case. And then it says specifically the email fails to provide material information regarding SUCRAID's full FDA-approved indication. So let's flip over to the label real quick, and we'll take a look at what's going on in the label. As I said, this is a non-PLR label, so it looks quite a bit different than what we're usually looking for, or what we're used to seeing in labels. But if we scroll down to the indication section here, let's just take a look quickly at the approved indication. SUCRAID is an oral solution, and it's approved for the treatment of sucrase deficiency. So this is really important. It just is indicated for the treatment of sucrase deficiency, which is one part of CSID. So CSID, of course, is congenital sucrase isomaltase deficiency. That sucrase deficiency is one part of it. It doesn't address the isomaltase deficiency. And specifically, it's approved for adults and pediatric patients 5 months of age and older. So Virginia, what are your thoughts on this presentation?
Well, first of all, I think the dinosaur's really cute. Gotta say it. But seriously, I think some of this could have been avoided. So the letter says that the indication isn't presented in its entirety. So the indication is there. You just have to really, really scroll super far down to find it. So I think in this case, if I was working on this piece, I would have advised my client to bring the full indication up into more of the body of the email. I think that would help a lot. I'm not sure if I'm totally on board with this presentation saying that they're trying to treat IBS. I think we can agree to disagree with FDA on that one, but that seems to be a bit of a stretch. But I do agree that the indication is not presented in its best light. It's really tiny, it's really small, and we're going to see that in this safety too when we talk about that next.
Yeah, I agree. When I initially read this too, I saw that the question, do you have patients suffering with unresolved IBS-like symptoms? I might not have included IBS-like symptoms. That would be my recommendation if I was advising a client. But
Sure.
again, like you said, we can agree to disagree with FDA on this. I think it's just one of those things that I think it's a little bit of a stretch, but moving into the next part of the letter, I think this is really where FDA starts to hit on some really black and white issues. So when we get into the next part of the efficacy paragraph, we see that they acknowledge that the full indication is presented at the bottom of the email with the important safety information. But they say that it's presented in small plain font after intervening text and eye-catching graphics and colors, and they say it's not sufficient to mitigate the misleading impression. So, Virginia, if we scroll down here to the bottom, what are your thoughts on how the indication and ISI are presented in this email?
Oh boy, I'm not sure where to start. I think FDA is spot on, and I actually think that this is a really simple letter, but this is going to be helpful in our day-to-day work because it's really hard to I review hundreds of emails a week. And I think that this is an age old problem, is trying to figure out how to get the indication ISI. And it's not easy to have safety look as exciting as a cute dinosaur in this case, but we have to do better than this. I think the gray background is not optimal. I think the font size is way too small, and I believe FDA called that out. It looks like the same as the T&Cs. It's below the T&Cs. That would have helped. And it doesn't have headers, right? Like if we're thinking about the presentation of risk guidance, which isn't cited in the letter, but I think we all still use that in our day-to-day work. And again, this isn't coming from PLR format. I haven't seen a non-PLR format in years. So that could be part of the problem. It would be really challenging to write the ISI if you didn't have the headers to kind of guide you in the order of the safety, and just kind of having the headers. Where are the warnings? Where's the contrast? You can't find it. It's just kind of a mishmash. So not optimal presentation of safety for sure. So I 100% agree with FDA on that part of the letter.
All right,
What
so
else?
the next,
sorry. Keep going. Let's talk about some of the detail of the safety.
Yeah, so I'm going to work through the next part because there's a lot going on in the second part of the email, in the second part of the letter here. So the next set of violations, and again, I think completely agree with OPDP on this one. They really break this down, and they really highlight, and they give us a lot of good insights into what should be included in ISI. So I'm going to break this down. I'm going to flip back and forth between the promotional piece and the label and highlight what's going on here. So the first thing that we see in the section where they're talking about the omission of material facts regarding risk, there's a few things going on with that ISI that the FDA is calling out. And if you're new to OPDP letters, it's important to note that whenever they highlight or whenever they underline text in their letter, they're signaling that this is the problematic area that should be addressed. So the first thing that we see, and I want to point out with non-PLR labels, the warnings and precautions are in separate sections. There's a dedicated warning section, there's a dedicated precaution section. So that's why you see these headings in the letter formatted this way. So the first thing that we see is this severe hypersensitivity reactions warning. And what they're highlighting here is first, the label classifies this as severe hypersensitivity reactions. So let's flip over to the PI and then look at the ISI, I'm sorry. And when we look at the ISI, the first thing that we see is that in bullet 2 is that warning. And it says that SUCRAID may cause a serious allergic reaction. And I think this is the first problem that they're calling out. I'm inferring from what's in the letter that they would rather see this instead of say serious, that they use the term severe, and that reaction should be plural because that's what's presented in the label. The next thing that we see is that they highlight the fact that the terms rash and pruritus are omitted from the ISI. So we go back here, we look at the ISI, and we see that they say that patients should stop taking SUCRAID and get emergency help if any of the following side effects occur. So we see difficulty breathing, we see wheezing, and we see swelling of the face. But again, as they call out here, it doesn't include rash and it doesn't include pruritus. Now, there is something interesting in this label that I want to call out before we move on, because in the patient information section, you'll see something interesting here. If we scroll down to where the warning is, in the patient information section, we see that the patient information has difficulty breathing, wheezing, rash, swelling of the face, lips, and tongue, but it doesn't have pruritus. So this is really important. Even though there's a patient information section, even though it omits pruritus, it's still important to remember that this is an HCP-directed promotional communication. And even if there's any kind of misalignment between what's in the med guide or the PI, the patient information, if that doesn't align to what's in the prescribing information, you should always refer to what's in the prescribing information for HCP-directed pieces.
And I have to say that happens a lot in my experience. As we were talking about this earlier, the PPI or the med guide, certainly the PPI in many cases is one of the last things to be created by sponsors. And I've seen a lot of times where things don't sync up, and it's really hard to do our jobs when you don't have to do that compare and contrast. But you're absolutely right. Always default to the full PI.
The next thing that they call out here is this have been reported, and this is really important to OPDP. Whenever we're talking about these kind of warnings and there's hypersensitivity reactions, and they've actually been reported either in the trial or in reports after the fact, patients who are taking the product are reporting these conditions. This is something that's very important to OPDP, and it should be included in the ISI. So they're highlighting the fact that it's not in there, and if we flip back again to the warning, we see that there's no mention of the fact that these that these conditions have actually been reported. We go to the label. And what are they talking about? Well, the label says under the warning that a pediatric patient in the clinical trials experienced a hypersensitivity reaction of severe wheezing that required hospitalization. And there's also been post-marketing cases of cutaneous hypersensitivity reactions that have also been reported. So again, anytime that there are actual reports of conditions that are aligned with a warning, it's really important to make sure that it's disclosed in the ISI that those have actually been reported. It's not just a theoretical situation where this might happen. If it has happened, it has to be included in the ISI in the eyes of OPDP. Moving on to the next section, we have the precautions. So we have a precaution here for blood glucose concentration with patients in patients with diabetes. So let's take a look first at what they say in the ISI. So we see that there's a diabetic precaution here. It's bullet 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So bullet number 5 is talking about diabetic patients. And what it says is that the physician should consider that SUCRAID will enable sucrose hydrolysis and the absorption of these hydrolysis products. And that matches the first sentence that we have here under the precaution. But what it omits is the directive to the HCP to monitor blood glucose concentrations and adjust diet accordingly. So remember, it's always important that if there are directives, if there's actionable directives to the HCP in the warnings and precautions, those should also be included in the ISI. So that's what they're flagging here. And then finally, we have another precaution for a dietary starch restriction. And let's flip back to the ISI. So here we see bullet 3 is where we see that precaution, and it says that SUCRAID provides replacement therapy for deficient sucrase. We saw that in the indication. But it does not provide specific replacement therapy for the deficient isomaltase. Again, that wasn't the indication. We know that the sucrose deficiency or sucrase deficiency is what SUCRAID is indicated to treat, and it doesn't treat the isomaltase. But what is omitted and what they're getting at here in this underlying text is, what does that mean for a doctor? What does that mean for an HCP? And it says that patients may still experience symptoms of CSID while taking SUCRAID. And if that happens, it's a directive to the HCP to consider dietary starch restrictions in addition to SUCRAID, especially in patients whose symptoms are not adequately controlled. So again, we see another example of a directive to the HCP that has not been included in the ISI. And finally, the last point here in this last paragraph, they say that the presentation of risk information in the emails do not appear in a sequence that discloses risk information in order of severity. And again, this is really important. We go back to the ISI and we see bullet 4 here is talking about adverse reactions, the common AEs, right? And that's being presented before that precaution we were just talking about for diabetic patients. And just as a reminder, the order here should be contraindications first, followed by warnings and precautions, and then finally common AEs. That's the order that those should be presented in the ISI. So here we see adverse reactions being presented in bullet 4, and a precaution is being presented in bullet 5 after that, common AEs. So that's a lot to digest. Virginia, what do you think?
I think that a couple things. Well, one, I just noticed that there's like the house applied and the storage recommendations. I'm not used to seeing that in an ISI. There might be something really special about this, but a lot of drugs need to be protected from heat and refrigerated. So I don't know. It just seems kind of odd. For me, the net impression of the safety presentation is really key. The headers aren't there. It's not in the right order. It just feels kind of like a mishmash of information. It's really hard to digest. It's really hard to take away. And, if you're thinking about public health, it's our job to make sure that the doctors know how to use the product, right, as a sponsor. So I don't think that this hit the mark. And I do think that it definitely has merit. I think that the takeaways for me are, what you just said. If there's something actionable for the HCP, if there's directive language that absolutely needs to be in there. Thinking about the order, thinking about the look and feel of the safety, the integration. This is definitely a miss. And I think the indication is interesting because this is something that I struggle with a lot, is trying to get that integrated into the main body of an email or a piece. So for me, that's a good takeaway. I also like to think about what's missing or what they didn't comment on. That's always kind of the fun part. It's like a little hunt. One thing I noticed, because I was just talking about this week with a client, is we've got the oral solution in there, but we don't have the strength of the product. So as per the regs, we need to have at least one dosage strength in there nearby the dosage form, and that's typically in the logo lockup. But so that's kind of a miss. Not a huge miss, but if you're doing a letter, I would have added it in. And I just think the ISI is really small, and it just doesn't pass the red face test. Like, there's no way this is defensible in terms of integration of risk. So hopefully that's not too severe, but that's my opinion. And I think they could have done better with that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of good insights. Always good to get insights in how OPDP is looking at things. And overall, I think it's a beneficial letter to us in industry. It really kind of helps reiterate some things that we've been trying to. I know I've been sharing with my regulatory teams. Some other people I've talked to share with their regulatory teams. So I think it's been a helpful letter overall.
Yeah, short and sweet. So, well, thank you. And, we're trying to be timely with sharing information. So this letter just got posted 2 days ago. Jason had the idea to jump on it and do a quick summary. So I'm hoping that you all find this useful, and we'd love to hear from you. Let us know what else you'd like to hear from us. Thanks for joining the Promotional Intelligence Podcast.